Welcome to the first episode of Deep Analysis. This is hopefully the first of a new series on the BoshNRoll channel where we get some smart people in a chat and we talk about topics that are important to them. So this first one, it was inspired by a Twitter thread that I started. I attributed Veil of Summer to the death of Nauseam Tendrils in Legacy. Bryant Cook, the inventor of the Epic Storm and owner of epicstorm.com, disagreed. And then we got into a Twitter thread where Alex weighed in and was like, respectfully, Brian, here's all the reasons you're wrong, or at least incomplete in your assessment. And he finished his thread by saying, I could talk about this forever. And I was like, well, then let's record it. And then we have Daniel, who is a known ad nauseam player who contributed to the thread too. And I was like, you know what? Let's make this a head-to-head. So this is not a debate. This is not settling old rivalries. This is just talking about where the Epic Storm is in Legacy right now versus where Nauseam Tendrils is in Legacy right now. And we're going to go about a year and a half, 2 years back in time to figure out the path that got us here. So my guests today are Alex McKinley. Alex, tell us about yourself.
Hey, everyone. Like Brian said, I'm Alex McKinley. I'm a writer for theepicstorm.com. I mostly do the one-off series. I've done a bunch of card reviews and other little neat analyses. I've actually had a couple of finishes lately that I top 8 at a challenge and top 8 at a showcase, which was pretty fun. But mostly I just like to think about Storm cards. So
that's
awesome. It's going to be a bunch of fun.
Yeah, we're here to think about Storm cards today. Daniel, introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Daniel. I stream occasionally at twitch.tv/DamatoXP. You can typically find me playing Ant there. I have a few finishes with the deck. I have a Legacy Challenge top 8. I finished 3rd at Eternal Week in 2019 in Pittsburgh with Ant. I have a couple SCG Tour finishes with the deck as well as an SCG Open top 4, but those were different formats. But typical all-around grinder, but love Storm more than anything else.
That's awesome. So welcome, both of you. Thanks for being here. Let's talk about what these decks are first. Let's not assume that anyone knows anything. If somebody is approaching this video to figure out what even is Storm, explain it like we're 5. Both of these decks, they have Dark Ritual. They have fast mana in Lotus Petal and Lion's Eye Diamond. They have tutors. And the goal is to cast 10 spells in a turn and Tendrils of Agony your opponent to death. And that's the goal of both of these decks for the most part. But they get there in different ways. They're very different shells once you leave the Dark Ritual, Lotus Petal, Lion's Eye Diamond, and Tutors engine. So, Alex, what is the Epic Storm doing that is unique?
So, all the Epic Storm wants to do is resolve ad nauseam. That's the primary goal of the deck. That's what we've designed the deck around, and within the constraints that ad nauseam puts on your deck in terms of average covered mana cost and all the other intricacies that come with that. I think in the past year, the Epic Storm has seen kind of a revolution to adopt Echo of Eons, the flashback time twister, which plays very nicely with Lion's Eye Diamond as kind of our secondary Storm engine. And we've moved away from, if you've recognized this idea of TES is the Empty the Warrens deck. It's no longer that. We're playing 2 copies of Tendrils in our 75. So you're playing tutors like Wishclaw, Talisman, and Burning Wish to help facilitate all of this. It's very much you're presenting lots of threats to your opponent, and you have a protection suite of in effect silence effects in Veil of Summer and Defense Grid to make your Echo of Eons better, to require your opponent to force a will and counter all of your protection spells instead of just letting them resolve. It's designed so that every single spell you play has to be answered at this point. That's kind of what we're looking at.
That makes perfect sense. Daniel, tell us about Ad Nauseam Tendrils.
Well, it's kind of just straight in the name there, to put it simply. The whole point of the deck is that you want to cast Ad Nauseam to either refill your hand to set up a line to go off and eventually Tendrils, or just generate a package of spells that get you there anyways. But typically, you're going to find that you win the game with Passive Flames. We're mostly a graveyard combo deck that likes to use determinative lines with a couple rituals, Infernal Tutor, and a Lion's Eye Diamond to just sequence our spells, just cast them, flash them back with Passive Flames, and just recast them again for an easy Tendrils line. But the Ad Nauseam comes in to where we can have explosive lines right out the gate, and with utilization of Lotus Petal and Dark Ritual, we're able to still win that turn or reset our hand and set up for a later Passive Flames win also. We've had a lot of different tutor packages throughout the years. I think it's changed over the past 2 years how the deck plays out, but something that's been consistent is how well Ad Nauseam is an engine and kind of like how it is in the Epic Storm as well, but not as efficient as it is in the Epic Storm. We're more of a control and setup deck that wants to rely on discard with Duress and Thoughtseize to clear the way to make sure that we can win the game through a Force of Will or an opposing Veil Summer or any other type of hate piece that we need to get rid of in order to win.
The common thread there, I described the Dark Ritual and the Tendrils and the fast mana. You both went straight to Ad Nauseam, though. Like, what does your deck do? We try to cast Ad Nauseam. In Ant, it's obviously in the name. The Epic Storm, even I was a little surprised by that answer that Ad Nauseam is your first stop on the way to going off. So that's cool to hear. But the protection package sounds like Ad Nauseam's trying to discard the way that your opponent can interact, or at least mitigate the hard ways they can interact, and then dance around the soft ways and go long, and then know exactly what's going to happen when you cast that Passive Flames. The Epic Storm is more on the, I cast Veil of Summer. Now I know my stuff's going to resolve. Let's draw 7 and see what happens. And the deck is well set up to win once it draws 7. But I'll tell you as the blue player here, the moderator of this conversation, the fun police, when Echo of Aeons was spoiled in Modern Horizons, and people were talking about, like, you can just cast Time Twister with Lion's Eye Diamond, I was like, sure, refill my hand. Good idea, Storm player. Like, you Thoughtseize me twice to make sure your Echo of Aeons resolves. Now I have a fresh 7. That's not a good plan. But
that's secretly the reason why we don't play discard in TES anymore, is because it just doesn't work at all anymore. It's just a dyssynergy.
Yes. One of the fundamental shifts here is how you're disrupting, how you're making sure your combo works.
Mm-hmm.
So
for sure,
the frame that we want to get to in this conversation is what is the place of these decks in the metagame now? Veil of Summer's printing is kind of the catalyst for us to even be here talking right now. And I brought up that, like, Cyrus Cormangill, obviously very powerful wizard across the board, but known for Legacy Ad Nauseam Tendrils. He lost in the finals of Eternal Weekend 2018. Then he won a Star City Open with Ad Nauseam Tendrils. Then he won a Grand Prix with Ad Nauseam Tendrils. Him and the rest of the Storm Cabal were all were putting up finishes for the whole year of 2019, right? Yeah, it was 2019.
2019.
Yeah, 2019 was just like the year of Storm of Ad Nauseam Tendrils. And then it just kind of disappeared. After Cyrus won Grand Prix Atlanta, Ad Nauseam Tendrils just sort of drifted into the background, and the Epic Storm slowly took its place. Like, I've been playing Legacy pretty religiously since about 2008, and just firmly cemented in my mind is the notion that Ad Nauseam Tendrils is the premier Storm deck of Legacy, and the Epic Storm is another variant you can play. But I feel like, looking at the numbers now, it's actually the opposite. So let's go back in time a little bit to, I think the banning of Deathrite Shaman is where we want to start this history lesson and figure out how we got to where we are today.
So to talk a little bit about that, and to touch back a tiny bit further, in the Probe era, we got to play, both decks played the same disruption package of Duress and Cabal Therapy. Once you lose Probe, that package isn't very good anymore. Therapy just isn't consistent enough without that cheating information from Gitaxian Probe. So once Probe is banned, you kind of have both decks trying to rebuild themselves. For TES, I don't think we ever figured it out, to be honest. I don't like. It took a very long time. We always had this awkward 60th slot floating around, and nothing felt good in it. So I think in that post-Deathrite golden era of Legacy, I think Ant was just like hands down the better deck. TES didn't have a good build that wasn't doing anything that Ant couldn't do better.
I mean, yeah, it was definitely something to look at. I remember that day vividly because I just finished a set of Japanese foil Gitaxian probes, and I was so excited, and they got cut. But I think, and obviously, the one thing that we did not have going for us that the Epic Storm did was that Deathray Shaman wasn't too much of an impact against TES because they weren't really, passive flames based at that time, I don't think still.
We had the Piff in the deck. We would cut the Piff in January of 2018, I think.
Yes. So passive flames is no longer a thing. So Deathray Shaman is not really your issue. Obviously, still a very powerful card, but it doesn't affect them as much as it was affecting Ant in the terms of like, hey, I'm going to eat your Dark Ritual in response to your current Piff determinative line. Now all of a sudden, like you lose maybe a Threshold Cabal Ritual and you can't win the game. So a lot of thought goes into how to properly build those lines to win through Deathray Shaman activation. And like Alex touched on, we utilize Duress Cabal Therapy with Gitaxian Probe because it's just a busted interaction. You look at your opponent's hand and you just get to name a card. If they have double Force of Will, they're forced to force your Cabal Therapy, or else they just lose both of them. So you know you're going to trade that spell for 2 cards, and it was just very powerful for both decks to be doing. And that's why Ant at the time had a main deck into the Warrens, because they would be able to look with Probe and they could realize, hey, I can make 12, 14 goblins right here, and my opponent just can't answer that because I now know what's in their hand. And that's what's also busted by Cabal Therapy is if they had an answer, but the combo was clear to go off, Goblins allowed you to use Cabal Therapy to take care of those cards. But with no probe and no information, Cabal Therapy is just not good. And that's why Ant shifted to Thoughtseize. But then you still had to replace Gitaxian Probe, and that's where the innovations started coming out. Like, well, we've got to find what works in this deck now, and that's how Preordained slowly rose from 1 to 2 copies and then 2 other flex spots to a full playset.
Yep. Yeah, and TES abused the Cabal Therapy flashback better than Ant did because we had the full 4 copies of Empty the Warrens in 75.
Yeah.
So we were just this Turbo Goblins deck at the time that then shredded your hand post Empty the Warrens.
Yeah, I top-baited Legacy Eternal Weekend in 2017 with Grixis Delver, and I had Electrickery in my sideboard, and that wasn't for Elves, it wasn't for Death and Taxes, it was for Empty the Warrens. Like, that was a real thing you had to consider out of basically every Storm deck. And
yeah, I know a lot.
The Epic Storm at the time had the nickname Grixis Goblins, or Black Belcher, because it was known for just, like, taking these, non-deterministic, but probably pretty good, like, make 8 to 12 goblins on turn 1, go. Don't sweep them. Like, kind of lines. Where at Nauseam Tendrils, you had a little more time. You knew that they were going to have to assemble 10 spells in a turn to kill you.
Well, during that time, even when Deathray Shaman was legal, like, making 10 to 12 goblins on turn 1 in the Deathray era was typically good enough to win. Because people had this mindset. I mean, and I don't want anyone to come raging at me because Deathray Shaman is obviously a very good Magic card. But when you're thinking from a Storm perspective, if you're able to make 10 to 12 goblins and your opponent's just turn 1 Deathray Shaman, you just kind of sit back. You're like, I'm no longer worried because it probably means they're playing some type of Delver Shell, and you got it locked up. You just go to the next game for game 2 or game 3, and you just got to hope you can just do it again. But yeah, obviously some other people, when they sit across from Deathray Shaman, they're like, well, I don't know how I could possibly beat this card, and that's understandable. But
yep. So, and then Probe is banned, all that goes out the window, and both of us have to rebuild. I think Ant does it better. At this point, for TES, I think internally we're experimenting with Mox Opal to try and see if we can make that card work, because so one of the advantages of being the Ad Nauseam deck is that we played more Chrome Moxes than Ant did, and there are a lot of Ant players who go on record saying that Chrome Mox is a bad card. It's fine. But it makes your Ad Nauseam so much better because you're not just reliant on hitting one of however many petals are left in your deck as your initial startup mana. You have so many more ways to hit a 0 to start your mana back up once you finish resolving Ad Nauseam. So we thought that we could attempt to turn on Metalcraft consistently enough. And that wasn't quite the case at the time. We were missing something to turn on Mox Opal. So it made all of our builds really wonky, leading up to GP Niagara, which I think is kind of an interesting point. I know I played that event. My list was not very good. I had a main deck of Braid. I don't know what I was doing. So what was Ant doing at that point?
I mean, yeah, we were testing kind of how we ended up with the 4 preordains and Thought Seizes. We had to find 4 new cantrips or some type of card generation spell, but we also needed still our disruption package. 4 Duress wasn't going to cut it in that current meta, and we didn't think it was going to cut it going forward. And while Thought Seize at first seemed like the obvious answer, there was a lot of hesitation because, our ad nauseams tend to be very life hurting. Like, unlike the Epic Storms, where they have a lot of zeros, you got to be careful when casting ad nauseam and Ant because you do have 4s, you do have a lot of 2s, and it does slowly, get out of control. And at first, people are like, oh, well, Thought Seize, that 2 life could actually matter. When typically, like, a 2 life for a card is always a good trade. But after testing happened, it was great. Like, you could just Thought Seize a Force of Will. You didn't have to worry about guessing. And it just ended up being that. It was just better than Cabal Therapy. And Ant was just, we were in like a rebirth. People were excited because they felt good about the deck immediately after one of the best Storm cards ever printed got banned. And it was just a good time to be playing.
Yeah. TS picked up Thoughtseize, but you have the same disruption package between both decks. TS picked up Thoughtseize as well, and we had the same considerations. But it's like, well, we were playing Probe before, so the amount of intrinsic life loss in the deck hasn't really changed. It's just shifted around to being on the back half of your disruption instead of the front half in Probe. So again, you have these 7 to 8 discard spells in both decks, and Ant still has this reputation at the time. I think we can delve into a little bit of matchup differences, as Ant is better at beating blue decks than TES, and TES was better in the non-blue matchups. Obviously, there are more blue matchups over the course of Legacy. So being better in the blue matchups means that you're probably a better deck overall, because you get to leverage those percentage points more often throughout a tournament. But I think a lot of people contributed it to the disruption package, which doesn't make sense to me because you're playing the exact same disruption package at that point in time. I think the card to talk about here is Past in Flames, the fact that it had flashback. So Brian, you're a blue player at pre-Modern Horizons, and your opponent just casts this one of their 2 Past in Flames in their deck. That's terrifying, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, even if I can counter it now, they're gonna refire next turn and try again. There were even like memes circulating, or like there was a great picture of a Past in Flames on the stack, and a blue player had Counterspell and Surgical Extraction in their hand, and it was like, how do you win? And it turns out that there's this cool stack trick you can do where you crack your fetch land, then Counterspell the Past in Flames, so they don't have priority to flashback Past in Flames because your fetch land's on the stack and you can Surgical it. But like, if the fetch land's not there, you can't win despite having Counterspell and Graveyard Hate against this spell that cares about the graveyard. And that's just like a really tough spot for it to be in as the blue player who's trying to 1-for-1 and gain incremental advantage.
Yep.
For sure. And I mean, to touch on the card like Chromox, how Alex mentioned a lot of Ant players came out saying like it just was essentially a bad Magic card. I would say a lot of that is attributed to meme, and I don't think people realize, I guess, how good Chromox is, especially now when you look at these current deck lists and how well TES is doing. I think the issue for Ant to be playing Chromox to try to make a better ad nauseum is that whole Past in Flames line. You don't want to, typically your Chromox is probably going to be wanting to make black mana, and you don't want to have to eat a Duress or a Thought Seize, eat a Ritual in order to cast your black spells, because that's one, you're kind of 2-for-1 in yourself. While you are making a Storm count and you're providing yourself with a mana source, you may be losing a Cabal Ritual that could be more useful in the graveyard compared to exile underneath the Chromox. But I mean, there's multiple ad nauseum Tendrils lists out there that utilize 1 or 2 Chromox, and they have success. I mean, hitting a Chromox off of ad nauseum is always going to be good because you're going to have extra cards to burn and throw underneath there, especially Thought Seize. When it comes down to when you're at 3 life and 2 life, and it's like, cool, I can trade this Thought Seize into a Lotus Petal, and it's perfect, and you get a Storm count out of it. I just think like Chromox was tested when Probe got banned, and seeing if like, okay, maybe we can make this work. And I think without having, without Thoughtseize being immediately there and stuff there was just issues with the cards not really lining up for more decent Pass and Flames lines under Chromox. You'd have to more shift to a more ad nauseam driven deck. And at that point, you'd rather just play TES because they are going to abuse ad nauseam better than you will.
Mm-hmm. So one of my fundamental theories about Storm is that by registering Storm, you get card advantage. Your opponent's going to draw these silly little cards like Swords to Plowshares in their deck, and you're just like, I have card advantage over you by simply registering no creatures in my deck, by not caring about those cards in your deck. We're going to go off fast enough that your cantrips become dead cards because you never get the chance to cast them and filter. So we reduce your deck down to a stack of very few cards that matter. And because we're so far ahead from the deck registration point, one for wanting to take all your cards that do matter makes sense, because then you're left with a handful of cards that don't matter. And all of our cards matter. So we're just going to win. And that's kind of a fundamental theory of Storm. And that worked very, very well and made a lot of sense with discard. And you even have some inherent 2-for-1s built into Ant with the Pass and Flames to just draw a bunch of cards out of your graveyard.
Yeah.
So is that kind of how it feels from the blue player's perspective as well? When you're sitting there just like your opponent goes Underground Sea Period and you're like, oh, nice swords.
Yeah, pretty much. In all of my videos, I have tons of videos of me playing blue decks, obviously, on my channel. And when that first fetch land, if Bloodstained Mire comes into play, I'm like, okay, we're playing against Storm. And just those sort of thoughts, and I'm immediately reeling okay, this Brainstorm needs to turn this Swords to Plowshares and this Tarmogoyf in my hand into something else, but I also need to get max value off the Brainstorm, so I need to set it up with a fetch land, so this Brainstorm isn't even good for another turn. I hope they don't act too quickly, because then I'm forced to Brainstorm without fetch land active just for the YOLO Force of Will off the top. It's immediately a tough spot to be in. And I use a lot of those deck building sticks in my control decks, which it's a little different than Storm, but I play creatureless blue-white decks all the time. I've been experimenting with the new Monarch cards. There's no creatures in that deck. No nice Swords to Plowshares. There's no non-basics in the deck. Nice Wasteland. I use a lot of the same sort of deck building heuristics in control, and it makes a lot of sense to try to line up your threats in a place where the format's answers aren't good against them. So speaking of lots of dead cards or number of cards that matter, in between GP Niagara and GP Atlanta, a set came out that had some impact on how Storm is built. I think it's safe to say. And I'm talking about Modern Horizons, which brought Force of Negation to the enemies and Echo of Aeons to the heroes. So let's talk about Modern Horizons. What happened that summer to Storm in Legacy?
Yeah, so to just start with Modern Horizons, TS had this sideboard slot where our own Pass and Flames would live, but Pass and Flames is not very good in TS. You need a lot of things to go right. You need multiple colors of mana after Pass and Flames resolves to do things. So it was always our worst sideboard slot. So when we saw Echo and that we could Burning Wish for Echo and then crack Elodie, we were just over the moon, because that solved our sideboard slot. It gave us a 3-mana line, a 5-mana line to go off super, super fast against the non-blue decks. And we thought we could just leverage Echo Beyonds to improve our non-blue matchups so much harder and kind of lean into that role. So we were excited about that. I don't believe that Echo Beyonds is playable in Ant. And I think, Daniel, when you saw Echo, how'd you feel?
When I saw Echo Beyonds, I was like, cool, time to reserve lines that I'm in, that's sweet. But then when you're playing Ant, we can't abuse draw 7s like that. We don't play Chromox, we don't play Mox Opal. And our only thing to do there, if we go untapped land and cantrip and all of a sudden we LED Echo, we have to hope we get a Lotus Petal and the entire combo suite in order for a deterministic line. So it's just really not in our benefit to play it, especially when we want to cast Ad Nauseam, because I feel like for Ant to abuse that card, you'd want to play 2 copies and build your deck, put your deck different. And if you do build your deck different with Echo Beyonds to support it, there's a good chance Ad Nauseam's not going to be in your deck if you're playing 2/6 drops to hit off of it. So it's kind of tough to build around it. But yeah, when I looked at Modern Horizons, Force Negation obviously appeared scary. I was like, this was an unnecessary card. It doesn't need to be there. I also looked at Force of Vigor, and I also looked at, I'm slipping on the name, but the Black Force as well, and also Collector Roof. So at first, when I saw the Black Force, I was like, wow, this is a potential sideboard card for Ant, because at the time, Black-Red Reanimator was kind of high in testing, and I was like, this is sick. We can pitch a Dark Ritual and destroy a Gristlebrand that entered the battlefield. And it's like, this could actually help leverage that matchup, but it just never really got around to testing it. I think the card that really impacted me first out of Modern Horizons was Collector Roof. When the Fair deck started playing Collector Roof and my Lotus Petals and Lion's and Diamonds were turned off, and Ant, that's a big deal. You really rely on your artifacts to win the game, and when Collector Roof comes down, it's a very game-changing card. It is tough to win, and it changes a lot of your lines. And I mean, when Force and Negation, obviously, which we can touch, I'm sure we'll touch on more on how effect that has, it just wasn't played as much as you would think by the Delver decks right out the gate. They were all focused on Wrenn and 6 as that brew came together. And Storm just didn't care about Wrenn and 6. Obviously, we have this insanely powerful 2-mana Planeswalker, but if you're a Storm player, your opponent just played turn 2 Wrenn and Station, you're grinning through your teeth because they're just going to lose the game. So it was a good time. Ant felt great when Modern Horizons got printed, other than obviously Collector Roof and maybe some other challenging cards. But it was really a good time to be playing Storm.
Yeah, I just want to riff off that Wrenn and 6 comment a little bit. The Wrenn and 6, it made Rug Delver insane. Just busted all of the fair matchups in half. That card ended up getting banned. And Alex just said a minute ago, Ant was better against blue decks. Epic Storm was better against non-blue. And you had this blue deck, Rug Delver, just was the deck. Every deck was a tier below Rug Delver. And Cyrus said that many times throughout that era of I love Wrenn and 6. It's great for the format if you're playing Ant.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So Wrenn and 6 being in Modern Horizons was also a card that directly affected Storm's place in the metagame without being a card specifically for or against the deck.
Oh yes, it absolutely did. I mean, people wanted to resolve Wrenn and 6 in that format, and I don't blame them. You play a turn 2 Wrenn and 6, if it goes unanswered, it will take over the game. The card is just absurdly powerful with Wasteland, fetch lands. It's just, that Delver Shell is one of the best Delver Shells we've seen in a while. But when you're playing Storm, and you already have a good matchup against Delver archetypes, and they're all sold in, there's a chance they keep a creature hand with Wrenn and 6, because Wrenn and 6 is that good against the rest of the field. They're going to be lighter to combo, and you can just, prey on them. And that's kind of how Eternal Weekend 2019 went, and I'm sure that's kind of how Atlanta went for Cyrus. Delver was a good matchup at that time because people were focused on playing Wrenn and 6. It was the best card you could be playing in Legacy almost at that time.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. And I don't think people had figured out Force of Negation yet either.
Yeah.
No, so
I think also something to contrast with that time period is that there wasn't a slow control deck at that point yet.
No, there wasn't. Miracles.
People hadn't figured out Snow, and Oko hadn't been printed yet.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and the Delver decks. Yeah, the Delver decks were leaning into Hex Drinker. They were trying to play more 1-drops, not more top end. Like today you see Uro, Oko, Klothys in the what's traditionally a tempo shell. Now it has one of the most dominating mid games as well as the great tempo shell. Rug Delver's still good, but that just wasn't there yet. And if you could get over that initial hump of the tempo, and Delver couldn't really afford the card disadvantage of playing 7 forces back then either, for the same reason.
Right.
Cyrus did play against Force of Negation twice in the top 8 of Atlanta, but it was one copy in 2 different decks. So I think he played against some sort of control-y deck. I think Colin Roundtree was on some sort of miracle-y type deck, and he beat Rug Delver in the finals. And both had Force, but just the one.
And I want to say that I know in my Eternal Weekend top 8, I was surrounded by Delver in one deck. And I think even at that time, other than the top 8 match I had against Blue Red Delver, which was packing, I think, still 1 force negation main, and I think 1 side. It just wasn't prevalent. Like, looking at those lists, and we can go back and look at them, I just think, if anything, Delver maybe had 1 copy of force negation in the sideboard, but it was a max, not sideboard, maybe main, but it was a maximum of 2. No one was playing more than 2 of that card, because, as you mentioned, the resources, it just wasn't there in order to trade cards for that, and they don't want to leave mana up for a 3-mana exile spell. But with, Ren 6 being eventually banned, we had another metagame shift.
Right.
Yeah, and I think there's one small thing we missed leading up to GP Atlanta, and that's Core 2020 and the printing of Veil of Summer, which Brian heralded as the death of Ant, which, given Cyrus when the GP was doing a sideboard, I don't think we could say that that's true. I think people saw this as like a good thing for Ant when it was printed, almost, or at least a neutral thing, because you could protect yourself from things like Hem to Torok and other discard spells. And it kind of took the role of the Flusterstorm in this sideboard, which kind of combated those things themselves. So when Veil of Summer was printed, it was a card that almost boosted Ant. From TS perspective, we didn't think that stretching to green at that point was good enough. It to us, it didn't feel like it fit our plan. Maybe we were wrong at the time, and just like maybe the Delver players were wrong for the number of forces that they played. But it's interesting to look back and see what that card did to that meta. And then I think you hit the banning of Ren 6, which might be the worst banning for Ant, ironically, in a long time.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting to think about, right? You analyze the card Veil of Summer. You just read that card as a combo player, and you're like, wow, this card is so incredibly good for my deck, but it's so incredibly good against me. And you don't get a lot of cards like that these days, where it's so beneficial for you to have it in your deck, but it's extremely beneficial for your opponent to have it in theirs. And when I started testing with Veil of Summer, I started out with like 1 to 2 main over 2 to rest, because it was kind of like, I wanted to be able to beat the control decks. I knew I had the Delver decks kind of locked up with the main deck empty still, because Goblins was still great to make against them game 1. But I wanted to have kind of a trump card against the major Force of Will control decks to get through their counter spells. And it was okay, but it seemed clunky. I wasn't a fan, and I was kind of missing my discard suite. And that's how I kind of ended up kind of similar to Cyrus with 2 Veil of Summer in my sideboard. And it's tough, because when Veil of Summer got printed, obviously you're looking at your hand disruption, and you're saying there's no guarantee anymore that this card's going to resolve post-board. Because back then, people weren't really playing it main. There was no reason to play it main. You're like, this is a really sick sideboard card, and it's going to be fine. But when you play the Storm Mirror, you're like, okay, is my opponent one of the ones that are going to play Veil of Summer in the main deck of their Storm deck? Because if you were, I mean, game 1's yours. You just got to find that card. You just sit back and wait. Because when you play the Ant Mirror, it's about racing. And when you go off, you're like, all right, well, I think the coast is clear. Like, I think I've got it. But if you cast Thoughtseize and they cast Veil of Summer, you have no idea anymore. You lost out on 6 cards, you get to view their hand, they drew a new one, and it's just, you have no idea what's going on, whether it's safe to go off, or even if you're playing against Storm anymore. It's just incredible to see how that one card has shifted the entire thinking of combo play.
Yeah, and for TES, like, we had the same discard suite, but we could win through a Veil of Summer by casting Grape Shot.
Right.
I think for a while you see Grape Shot as this kind of meme inclusion when the card had a bunch of uses, from like being like a pseudo pyroclasm effect or another alternate win condition. When I was truly in there as like an alternate win condition to win through Veil of Summer, like if your opponent leaves a green up, you cast Ad Nauseam, draw 25, 30 cards, and then you hit Storm 20 with ease. And your opponent's just dead no matter how many Veils they have.
It was pretty wild. I think Veil of Summer actually brought some of Ant Cabal out of hiding. That card significantly excited some people, and they started building and brewing decks. Brandon Control for Days came back to Moto for a little while and started building. He played it was like a grinding station version of Ant. Had Burning Wishes because, like Alex said, he's very good. He realized that Grape Shot was a way to get around your opponent's opposing Veil Summers. And he's like, well, how can I port this to Ant? So he played his own Veil of Summer's main, but he also kept like the typical Ant package, but added those 2 flex slots to be Burning Wishes, so that, hey, my ad nauseam, I've drawn enough cards to win the game, but I don't want to lose to my either combo opponent's Veil or my control deck person's Veil they're just tanking. I can just build enough Storm Count to get Grape Shot out of my sideboard. And at that time, it made a lot of sense. And it still makes a lot of sense in this meta with how good Veil of Summer is to have a trump card that beats it. At my time, I just couldn't figure out a good way to get Burning Wish to work. So I was like, okay, they veiled me. I'm just going to make 40 goblins and hope they can't get rid of them.
Yeah, in that Twitter thread where I brought up why Epic Storm might have come up when Ad Nauseam went down, I attributed that largely to a non-black win condition. And through Veil of Summer, and cards always take a little bit of while to pick up. We're going to talk about Throne of Eldraine in a second here. Like Oko, it was like, maybe some control decks could play one. And like, look where that went. And like the Veil of Summer as well. Like the control decks who got sick of losing to Ad Nauseam, especially after it took down the GP, were just like, wait, we could play 4 of these just between the 75 and become super hostile. And your Veil doesn't stop my Veil. So like it's kind of a large trump if you want to beat Ad Nauseam, but I am understanding now better the context for which that was allowed to foster.
Yeah, and I think one thing to note about Veil of Summer as well is that Veil of Summer and Infernal Tutor don't play well together.
They don't.
Yeah. Either your Veil of Summer draws a card and puts a card into your hand and makes you no longer Hellbent, which is bad, or you've cracked your Lion's Eye Diamond and the Veil of Summer is no longer in your hand to protect your Infernal Tutor. So you kind of have to cast Veil of Summer as more of a silence rather than this cryptic command that people made it out to be when you're using it defensively like that.
And I can touch on that point if we go over like what's a current deck list looking like in terms of how I think I've solved that problem. But I think one thing that we're also forgetting here is that Veil of Summer did kind of introduce a new subtype of a deck to the format and blue-green show and tell. That everyone just kind of forgot that all of a sudden people forgot, hey, I'm going to take this really busted combo strategy anyways, and I'm just going to chuck 4 Veil of Summer main and just make sure it just always resolves. And that was actually kind of one of the attributing factors to Ant starting to decrease, because Ant could not beat that deck. Like, Black Red Reanimator used to be a boogeyman in the format because, they went faster. Chancellor of the Annex is a very difficult card to beat. But the combo deck putting Gristlebrand on the battlefield with Force of Will and 4 Veil of Summer main made it very difficult for Ant to be good.
Yeah, I got to say, I as a blue player, I was worried about like my place in the Legacy metagame for that like 3 months or whatever where blue-green show and tell was the hot deck. I was like, I can't beat this. Show and tell was tough for blue decks before they just played 4 Cryptic Command, Silence, whatever, everything card. And it was just like, this can't be done. I'm glad the meta was able to continue shifting forward from there.
Right.
Speaking of shifting forward from there, Throne of Eldraine was a set that came out at the very end of 2019, and that brought a big card for the Epic Storm that I'll let Alex talk about. It brought a big enemy to all Storm decks, which I'm going to be happy to talk about. And it brought Mystic Sanctuary as well, which is a card that Alex and Brian both mentioned in the demise of Ad Nauseam Tendrils conversation on Twitter that I had not considered in the context of what's happening to Storm, that Mystic Sanctuary might be involved. So, Alex, tell us about Wishclaw Talisman, because that is a big deal.
So this is a card that we got wrong when we first read it. I think that there's an article out there where I'm quoted as saying, this card won't fundamentally change the build of the Epic Storm, which is somehow not the most wrong I've ever been in a review article. But that just shows you that you need time with cards and, spoiler season and playing with cards is what matters. So I think it was around Thanksgiving of last year when Bryant went into the lab and popped out with this insane looking contraption with 4 Mox Opals, this Echo Vions in the main deck, and no Infernal Tutors. and we were like, what is this? And then we started playing it and just started rolling face. Like, basically what happened is that every single spell we cast had to be Force of Willed, and that changed from the discard dynamic. And this was the point where Snow was the biggest thing and the best thing to be doing, right? This was the heyday of Snow, and Veil of Summer was everywhere in main deck, sideboards, whatever. So we're like, why don't we just play it? And we got to be this Echo Beyond's Ad Nauseam deck, and be this. And the secret of that deck was you just kept playing permanents, and that's how you break the parity of a Time Twister. Is because it resets your hand and graveyard. The only zone you get to preserve is what's in play. So if you've just dumped more stuff into play, you get, that's how you make your card advantage out of that. So there be a lot of times where it's just like, yeah, I'm going to dump like some artifacts into play in this Wishclaw Talisman. I'm going to cast Echo without any real expectations of winning the game that turn. If it happened, that's neat. That wasn't necessarily the goal. You just like broke a bunch of card advantage that way. And that was the new TES. This was how we fundamentally rebuilt the deck with Veils, with Echo, with Wishclaw Talisman. And it took all three of those printings to really revitalize TES and make it just smash the blue decks more than I think Ant can at this point.
So, yeah, when Throne of Eldraine got printed, obviously there's about 75% of the set we could talk about how it's probably impacted the format. But Wishclaw Talisman was a weird one, right? Because you're looking at it and you're like, wow, this is really a reusable demonic tutor. And you're like, okay, well, it goes to my opponent. It was like, wait, I get it back for the last activation. So at that time, my flex slot was Dark Petition. And you could ask any of Ant Cabal, any Ant players, and they will tell you I love Dark Petition. I would always defend that card in any argument because I just loved casting it. It was my favorite card in the deck. I could not ever foresee cutting it. And they're like, oh, well, we can just play Wishclaw Talisman over Dark Petition. And we got around to testing it, and I wasn't a fan, so I just went back to Dark Petition. But these days, I mean, you're not going to find Dark Petition in my deck. You're going to find 2 Wishclaw Talisman. So I came around because at the end of the day, when you realize that what that card does for these combo strategies is just incredible. You get to play it out, or at least in my case for Ant, I get to play it out on turn 2. And now my opponent's got to either answer that card, answer whatever card I get, and it requires them to have so many different things in order to stop me from winning the game next turn for the cheap activation of 1. And obviously with Lions of Diamond in our deck, they turn into Black Lotuses with Wishclaw Talisman. If you have 2 Lions of Diamond and a Wishclaw, now you've got an Adnals, and that's just ridiculous. And I think the way that the Epic Storm is currently built, it's just incredible. When you look at that deck list, you're like, okay, I maybe I don't understand at first how this all comes together, and then you start playing it, and you're like, wow, the way these cards synergize together, the way it's incredibly built. And, it'd be great if Ant could utilize Wishclaw Talisman the way that Epic Storm does. But typically what I tell people that try to build these hybrid lists that work with Wishclaw Talisman, but in an Ant shell, I'm like, it's not worth it. You're just making a worse version of Ant and a worse version of Epic Storm. If you want to play Wishclaw Talisman, like in a 4-of, just play Epic Storm. There's no reason to try to, combine them together to make it work for your interest in what cards you want to play.
Yeah. So the Wishclaw Talisman, I recently recorded a video with Bryant where we played all kinds of, or we played a league with the Epic Storm. He showed me what it's about and how to sequence and stuff. And I was, as a blue player who has only played against it, I was still in the headspace of, they're going to try to do something overwhelming quickly. And that's just not what the deck does anymore. Like, Bryant started off our video with, okay, so the plan is to cast a turn 1 Wishclaw Talisman as often as possible. And I was like, oh, right. There aren't 4 empties in this 75 anymore. Like, there's just the 1. And, like, I had still been playing against Epic Storm like it was going to dunk all over me on turn 1, which is actually like pretty hard to do at this point out of the deck. It's taken on that control role that Ad Nauseam used to play, but rather than shred your hand and do something deterministic, it just like counter this, now counter this, now counter this. Oh, that resolved? Then everything else is going to resolve too. And just like on turn 3 or 4, you get like a really nice clean kill. So Wishclaw Talisman just really truly did fundamentally change the Epic Storm.
Yeah, and unlike to delve into Wishclaw a little bit more, and unlike Infernal Tutor, Wishclaw Talisman plays very well with Echo Beyonds because you could use Talisman to find either half of the LED Echo combo. And then also, I think not everybody realizes this, but you can activate Wishclaw Talisman at instant speed on your turn to find Veil of Summer in response to your opponent's Force of Will after you've cracked LED, which that's an interaction I know that Daniel's been testing in Ant with either Veil or Flusterstorm, but that's just also a very powerful interaction that I think catches a lot of blue players off guard that, wait, you can activate that in response to my Force of Will? Oh, no.
That's what took it to the next level for me, is when I finally built that list. I have one Veil of Summer main and one Flusterstorm main currently in Ant because of Wishclaw Talisman. With Cabal Rituals giving you Threshold, you can make it plenty of black mana you need to win the turn. That if you have a Wishclaw Talisman as an extra, it's great. Because now, if your opponent all of a sudden did brainstorm into that force, kind of like Alex was saying, you can't Veil in response to an Infernal Tutor, because if you draw a card, it's bad. But Flusterstorm is incredible. Like, you get to, oh man, my Infernal Tutor's on the stack. I'm Hellbent, but I've got a Wishclaw active. I've got extra mana to use. Like, all right, cool. They found the Force of Will. Sweet. I'm going to activate Wishclaw, get Flusterstorm, and counter it. And now it's like, you're good. It's incredible how innovation works. And I ate my own words significantly because I was not an advocate of Wishclaw Talisman. I thought it was terrible. I said I'd never cut Dark Petition. And here I am with no Dark Petition in sight and 2 Wishclaw main in my deck. And I'm like, I think this is probably one of the best versions I've played outside of the Forbidden Companion Ant, earlier this year.
Let's just skip over all of that stuff because that's
we won't reference that stuff.
Yeah, that didn't happen. Yeah. So another thing, there's probably not a whole lot to say about this card because it's just a dump truck, is Deafening Silence. Also
didn't need to exist.
Yep. Well, so I will say from the blue-white side of things, Deafening Silence being a 1-mana spell that starts the permanent hate chain against Storm is just such a game changer. Like Storm, there's always been a million hate bears, like 2-drops that disrupt Storm in some way. Like there's Thalia, Lavinia, whatever. Like Collector Oof. Like the list is long, but they always had 2 turns on the play and 1 turn on the draw to beat those. Like you get that free, like the Aether Vial go, GG sucker. But like not anymore. Now there is a 1-drop that can shut down the whole chain. And I've adopted that into basically all of my control decks. Like you look at my posted lists over the last year, like it's Deafening Silence, making the curve up into Stony Silence. I'm just a silence themed deck now to combat your silence of Veil of Summer, because counter spells don't work against Storm anymore.
Yep. And one interesting thing about Deafening Silence from a metagame perspective is that it's actually on the decline because there's more than one good combo deck in Legacy at the end of 2020. Like the fact that Elves is also a premier combo deck and counterspells are also a very bad way to fight Elves due to Shepherd means that there's more Canonists. And that's very happy for us Storm players over here that we don't have to do with this stupid Deafening Silence, and that is just Canonists back to being Canonists.
I've got some strong feelings about Deafening Silence because it made me change how I boarded against so many matchups, and it was just so frustrating. Like, I joked, obviously, about Elves in 2019 Eternal Weekend being a bad matchup for Ant. Elves is typically a good matchup for Ant, but there was a time where I lost 17 matches in a row to that iteration of green-white Elves, because I could not beat the cards Deafening Silence and Archon of Sun's Grace. And I sat there and I was like, I don't know how to win this matchup anymore. And all of a sudden, I'm having to bring in 6 cards for Elves because, if they just go turn 1 Deafening Silence and I don't have chains, I'm like, well, okay. And I was like already in between about bringing in chains because Archon could just name instant, Archon could name sorcery. Like, they can do whatever they want to make sure they win the game. So it got really tricky sideboarding against one of the decks that utilized Deafening Silence so well. But then, thankfully, against the control piles, I was already on this sideboarding plan of cutting a lot of my fourth copies of combo pieces like Infernal Tutor, LED, Lotus Petal, and Cabal Ritual, like cutting the fourth copy of all these cards and bringing in Abrupt Decays, Carpet of Flowers, Veil of Summers, and to where if they played a Deafening Silence, it's like, okay, sweet. I just got to sit here and grind until I find an Abrupt Decay, then go off through it. But no, it is frustrating because you bring in bounce spells for like Death and Taxes for Ant and stuff like that, or you may have the Massacre for Death and Taxes, and they just go Plains Deafening Silence, and you're just like, well, I mean, you're looking at the Massacre in your hand, like, I can't win. Like,
yeah, in my league I played with Bryant, we played against the 80 card Yorion Green White Reclaimer deck in one of the rounds, and they played 2 Deafening Silence in their 75 or their 95, excuse me. They played 2 of them, and we were on the play game 3, and he's like, okay, we win on turn 2 unless they have that card. Like, he wouldn't even speak its name, and then they had Deafening Silence. They just kept a juicy little 7 in their 80 card deck with their 2 of card, the 1 card we couldn't interact with. And that was the first time I felt it from the other side. Like, it always feels tenuous. Like, I'll admit from the blue side, even if I have like Deafening Silence, Null Rod, and like, I don't know, Camball in play, like I'm always thinking like, what if they like Abrupt Decay my Null Rod end step, they untap Chain of Vapor, they play Caracas, bounce my Camball, and then just win. Like, all of those are like that's what you have. That's the life you live as a blue player against combo. And
I wish.
Well, right. But like, being on the other side as Epic Storm for that one game, I was like, I can't do anything. Like, you can't even effectively cantrip for an answer anymore.
Nope.
Yeah, tell us, Brian, how's it feel when your opponent's got 2 or 3 lock pieces on the battlefield, and you're looking at your hand of like 3 rituals, a land, a petal, and like a ponder?
It feels like, real bad. If you want to see it firsthand, that was round 5 in my match with Bryant on this channel. Like, you can feel it in your soul. Like, when they cast that card, it was bad. Like, now I know what I've been doing to Storm players, and like, I'm not going to change my ways, but I might play a little more boldly once I have those hooks in, because I really understand how hard it is. So yeah, we're going to transition into the last topic here, start to wrap this thing up. And I'm just going to call this like 2019 design or philosophy of fire, like whatever it is. And I'm going to use a phrase that Patrick Sullivan invented that I've been using a lot lately because I love it, and it's Bane Drifters. So cards used to be Baneslayer Angel, just like a big fat animal that could win the game on its own, but it gets answered cleanly by a Swords to Plowshares, like, oh good, I found it in time, I'm at 4, I can stabilize. Or they were Maul Drifters, where it's like, okay, my opponent got some card advantage, but this thing's not going to kill me. Now Bane Drifters are both. Like, you got Oko, Uro, Dreadhorde Arcanist. It's like, I have to answer this because it's going to kill me, but if I don't have the answer immediately or very quickly, every turn it's in play makes it worse. And that sounds like a bad... I'm going to put Mystic Sanctuary in that pile too, like, because it's not a Bane Drifter, but it goes in those sort of decks. And that goes into why discard is bad in Legacy, period. Like, even the control decks, like Grixis Control or like 4-color Leovold, those were premier decks for a stretch of time because they could Thoughtseize into Hymn to Turok and then like Jace the Mind Sculptor to win. But like, now you Thoughtseize, you Hymn to Turok, your opponent peels Oko, and you're miles behind, despite them being hellbent seconds ago. And that doesn't sound like a good meta position for the deck that wants to make its opponent discard all its cards, then win deterministically. So let's wrap this up by talking about the current metagame and how Ant and TES fit into it.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess to go card by down these 4 cards, right? DHA and discard. I think a lot of Ant players are actually messing this up. I think when they're facing down a Dreaded Arcanist, people are just firing discard into these hands, trying to clear away when it's not necessary, and then they're getting stuck by DHA finding the Forcibles after the fact. I'm terrified of DHA. I'm going to be honest. Like, that card's very, very good against Ant. It refills her hand repeatedly. But I think one of the things I realized was that if I just stop casting Thoughtseize and Duress, it's a 1/3. I mean, it's going to attack for 1. It's going to get in there. It's only really a problem if there's a flip Delver on the battlefield with it to where I'm taking forward turn. Discard is still good. You just have to play smart and realize that Dark Ritual, while it's obviously a necessary card to win the game, it gives you 3 black mana to cast 3 discard spells. And once you realize how to properly sequence these things, you can beat cards like Dreaded Arcanist. So I'm finding myself more these days casting Dark Ritual first before casting Hand Disruption, so that I'm not trapping myself on mana to get blown out by Daze or Spell Pierce or anything like that. And it also helps with beating DHA because they're refilling their hand, but now you're picking apart their hand. I think to summarize Oko and Uro from Ant's perspective is that it soft banned Empty the Warrens out of our deck. I used to always play Empty the Warrens main. I was a huge fan of it. It was great against Delver. I just can't. I'm still going to bring it in against Delver. I just can't justify it as a game 1 strategy anymore because of Oko. If I only make 12 goblins against Delver that has already 2 creatures and they play Oko, I will lose. I have never really won from that position. And then when you make goblins against these snow piles that are playing Uro, that card says gain 3 life, draw a card. And then God forbid it comes back and starts attacking you and blocking, then it's even worse. Like, it's always a gamble to play Empty the Warrens now against those decks. You kind of have to check their hand and make sure it's okay, because typically you can win through 1 Uro activation. You're not going to win through multiple Oko activations, and you're not going to win if Uro is an alive creature on the battlefield. But those cards definitely shook up how I approach winning the game with Ant. Mystic Sanctuary, I'm going to be honest, has not affected me that much playing Ant. I think it does come up occasionally where they're able to fetch Mystic Sanctuary, put a Force, and Brainstorm. But if you play around the card properly, you're never going to put yourself in a position to lose right there. The only time you're going to lose to Mystic Sanctuary is if they put something on top that you just can't beat, that you knew they can't beat, and you're hoping they make the wrong decision.
I'm going to jump in on your discard point real quick, then I'll let Alex finish off this segment. Okay. So sequencing your discard, saving it for when it matters, is one of those high-level skills that a better player will figure out how to do. I go back to one of the early modern Grand Prix, like Deathrite Shaman was still legal. I played against Reed Duke. He was just always on Jund at the time. I knew that going in, and I was on Rug Delver, and I kept a hand that had like Spell Pierce, Spell Snare, and then Tarmogoyf. And I was like, okay. And I was on the play. It's like, all right, I'll Spell Pierce his Inquisition of Kozilek, Spell Snare is Tarmogoyf, Spell Pierce is Liliana, then my Tarmogoyf's going to win. Like, I just mapped out the game. He just went land go until turn 3. And then he went Inquisition, strip your Spell Snare, play Tarmogoyf. Next turn, Inquisition, take your Spell Pierce, cast Liliana the Veil. And I was just like, oh, I've lost. Because he didn't just jam his spells onto the stack because he could. Like, he understood at the macro level that, like, I'm gonna try to tit for tat him on curve and tempo him, and he's just gonna make land drops and beat me. So, like, that's exactly what you just said. And sequence your stuff right, and some of the stuff will get mitigated that way.
Yeah, the only times I tell people to play discard first out of Ant is if you are 100% certain you know it matters. Like if I'm playing against Death and Taxes, yeah, I'm gonna fire a turn 1 Thoughtseize. I want to know exactly what's going on, what clock they're presenting, and what hate pieces they have, and see if I can stop one. Or if you're playing like a combo, so I think the biggest thing I'll touch on real quick is combo mirrors. People are playing Disruption turn 1 on combo mirrors, and they should stop. Unless you know that Veil Summer is absolutely going to be an issue. Like, you can justify it a little bit against Epic Storm. But if you have a Preordained or a Ponder in hand, I just think the utility of being able to cantrip and set up your next 2 turns draws, and then have your Hand Disruption spell to take care of any issues along the way, but have your combo building at the same time, is so much more beneficial than Thoughtseizing, potentially blanking, and then having to spend the next 2 turns cantripping, where you could just die. Like, I could look at Alex's hand, take a Talisman, and he could just draw a Talisman. He may have had a hand that kills me. And now it's like, well, my Thoughtseize was irrelevant. So I'd rather just cantrip, set up my chance to give myself the best way to win the game. And if Alex has it, he has it. And that's kind of how combo mirror should go.
Yeah, and an interesting dynamic in that is that combo decks overall have slowed down.
Yeah.
Like, going off on turn 1 in the blind isn't a good strategy anymore because your opponent is likely to win the coin flip of having their Force of Will if you're on 6 or 7 forces. There used to be this theory in Storm that if you have the turn 1 on turn 1, you go for it 100% of the time because that's a coin flip you're willing to win.
Yep.
And you're favored in that coin flip. That's not true anymore. And so that's why combat decks have slowed down. They need more protection. That sweet spot is turn 2 to turn 4 before your opponent can get their card advantage engine online. After you've picked up your protection pieces, that's why you see Ranmer fall off the map. That's why you see Belcher fall off the map. They're just not able to be protected enough to beat 7 Force of Wills, 6-7 Force of Wills. Let's imagine a world where Wizards bans Veil of Summer tomorrow. I think that this doesn't bring discard back into a metagame and into a good spot because you can't Thoughtseize the top of the deck. That's what they always say. Like, every card in Legacy is so good now. And also imagine Hypnotrocking your opponent and making them discard their Uro. It just sounds awful. So I think Veil is a very important piece of keeping combo well represented in this metagame because it is this protection piece that can break through all these forces. Like for TS facing down Oko and Uro and Dreadhorde, it's not the same dynamic of you have to take away their disruption. It's I'm going to 2-for-1 you every turn, or make you feel like you have to get 2-for-1 by playing Claws, by playing Veil of Summers, so that I can keep up with you drawing 2 cards a turn because my cards are better than your cards. And that's kind of how those matchups play out. That's where you see Carpet Flowers come in. So if I can play more spells than you, I'll win because all my spells are game winning. And that's why Carpet's good, is because you can overload their turn over turn advantage by breaking it all in one turn. And I think that leads to, I think that there was a comment on your YouTube video that you put with Brian that all these micro decisions in TES seem to matter. I think that there's this perception that if you are very good at Ant, you can be very good at TES very quickly, and vice versa. I don't think that's true anymore. I think that it's a very different skill set, a very different play style. Like maybe the difference between Ant and TES used to be Rug versus Bug Delver or something like that. Now it's Rug Delver versus Snow. Like, I don't think if you're good at Delver, you're necessarily going to pick up Snow and be great at it. You have to practice. You have to understand that burning Storm count early in TES isn't a bad thing if it lets you get an advantage. If you tap 2 lands to play a Wishclaw Talisman, you draw a Dark Ritual effectively, because that's 2 less mana you need on your combo turn. But burning your Storm early in Ant is bad because you need that for your deterministic Past and Flames lines to build up enough Storm. Whereas with TS, you're like, I'll just draw a million cards and hit that Storm count anyway. So understanding those differences and why the decks play differently, and you just can't play them the same. I think people need to realize that if they're trying to pick up one over the other, you're not going to be good at TS the first time you pick it up. There's going to be a painful learning process.
Yeah, those are all great points. And I will say, after this conversation, this last hour we spent together, I am officially off the Veil of Summer. Legacy would be better without Veil of Summer plan. Like, I never thought that card was particularly bannable, but it was one of those ones that I wish wasn't printed. But now that it's here, kind of whatever. Like, it never really bothered me in Blue Mirrors because it's basically just like a different Pyroblast, and we're very used to playing with Pyroblast and Blue Mirrors. I didn't like what it did to and what it did for combo decks. But in the frame of Ad Nauseam is still kind of fine, and discard is bad even without Veil of Summer, then maybe it is where combo decks should be in a healthy place in the current iteration of Legacy. So I've been sold on that. Also, just a shout out to my blue players watching this. You heard them both. Don't rely on your counter spells. Play Deafening Silence, play Null Rod, play those cards. That's how you're going to beat Storm.
You don't need to do that.
Yeah, they will steer you away, but I'm here to help. So they've let us look behind the curtain. And like I said, if you look back at my list, I've been on permanent-based disruption, up the curve, like start at turn 1 with your Deafening Silence if you're on white, work your way up to the Null Rods and Stony Silences, and then make sure you can clock them. Don't put more counterspells in your deck. Like, you don't really see me playing Flusterstorm on my sideboard anymore because that's just not where Legacy is. So, gentlemen, do either of you have any closing thoughts before we shut this thing down?
Sure. My closing thought is I think of all the cards we've talked about today, I know there's a lot of ban discourse currently in the Legacy community. I think the only realistic card that's not going to be legal this time next year is Dreaded Arcanist. I think you'll find that Oko is still going to be legal. I think Uro will still be legal. I think Veil of Summer should still remain legal. I was at a time that Veil should be banned, but I mean, like we talked about today, I think Veil is actually healthy for this format, and it's really not that bad. So the Ant players out there, if you're not playing Ant because you're worried about Veil of Summer, I highly recommend you pick it up and start playing again. The chances it's just low these days. Yes, there are deck lists playing Veil main, but it's kind of like those deck lists that are playing Chalice main. You don't play Magic to be like, afraid of your worst matches. You play Magic to have fun and enjoy what you're doing. And if you're not playing Ant because I guess you think Veil of Summer's unfun, that's one thing. But if you're not playing Ant because you think Veil of Summer is the reason why Ant can't be good, I would just tell you you're wrong. Because I think Chalice of the Void is more of a terror for Ant than Veil of Summer is.
I will definitely agree with you that Dreadhorde Arcanist is the most ban-worthy card in Legacy right now, and I think it's not even close. Great point. Alex, what do you got?
If you're looking to pick up Storm for the first time, I think this is the first meta where I would recommend picking up TES before Ant. I think TES has proven that it's the better deck in this metagame, and it's not particularly close. I think you can have a great run with Ant if you get the right matchups and you draw well. But I think if you're looking to do well consistently in a tournament with Tendrils of Agony in your deck, pick up the Wishclaw Talismans, pick up the Burning Wishes. And
Alex, if I wanted to learn TES, where could I go?
There's this great website called theepicstorm.com. It's got literally everything and probably things you'd even need to know that are great there. We got articles, we got videos, and everything in between. And there's also this podcast on that site. I don't know. It's like associated.
That would be the Eternal Glory podcast, hosted by myself and Brian Cook of theepicstorm.com and Phil Gallagher of Thraben University. So you get the taste of Prison, the taste of Blue, and the taste of Combo every week. It's a full meal for your Legacy needs. So, guys, thanks for doing this. This was a lot of fun, and I'll see the viewers for the next episode. I think this went well enough that I'm going to do it again someday. So, thanks, dudes.